What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Junior Markets YouTube page. If you're tuning in from YouTube, make sure to check out the website. We're going to be using that a lot today because today we're going to be going over a bunch of ratios that you can use to help evaluate a company. And for the Club I'm Smith, the Student Managed Investment Fund, we have a bunch of our financial and economic professors talk about how these are some of the most used ratios in the industry. And then I'm going to be going over how we can use them, where you can find them, and then more importantly, what they're used for. So we're going to be going over a few things. We're going to be going over liquidity ratios, solvency ratios, and efficiency ratios. I'm going to be going over 3 of each, and this is going to be a 2-part thing because there are a lot of ratios to go over, and I didn't want to fit it all into one video. So first off, we're going to start off with liquidity ratios. Now, I have a few of these on the website that I go over. Now, I have these listed here, but I only go over some of the most important ones that I see. Now, obviously, all of these are important. It just depends on the industry. But to start off, we're going to start off with quick and current ratio. So these two are very similar. It's a way for companies to measure if their assets can cover their liabilities in the short term. So for current ratio, like we can see right here, it's current assets divided by current liabilities. So you obviously want this number to be more than 1 to show that a company has more assets than liabilities. But if we switch over to quick ratio, we still take current assets over current liabilities, but we subtract inventory and prepaid expenses from current liabilities. So it's more of a short term. Just make sure this company has enough near term cash assets to pay their current liabilities. So these are 2 that we're going to go over for liquidity, and we have one more, which is operating cash flow ratio, which is not listed on this website, but is still very important. And my AD told me that he wants us to use it for these companies, so I'm going to go over that now. And then after that, I'm going to show you where to find them and how to use them for a company, and then we can move on to the next view. So operating cash flow ratio is the operating cash flow, which you can just find on a balance sheet or an income statement, and then divided by current liabilities. And it measures how well current liabilities are covered by cash flows generated from operations. Now, obviously, cash flow from operations are one of the most important things for a business. There's 3 different types of cash flows on the income statement, and operating is from the general company's operations. So this ratio deals with companies with more of a consistent cash flow, such as utilities, because a lot of utilities are government regulated and they're subscription based. And well, not necessarily subscription based, but people pay their monthly bill. So these cash flows are more consistent than something like a technology company. So that's where this comes into use. And now I'm going to switch over to another website and show you how to use them. So now there's a lot of major websites you can use to find these. The easiest one is probably Yahoo Finance. So if you type in Yahoo Finance, go to a company. I'm using Apple as an example. Then you go to statistics. You can find a lot of these metrics that we were talking about. You can find a lot of other ones. We'll be talking about these in later videos. So as we can see, Apple's current ratio is 0.95. This means that they have more debt than assets. So that means that their current assets cannot cover their current liabilities. But obviously, it's important to look at context, and you can't just look at these few ratios by themselves. You have to look at a bunch of different things for the company because obviously Apple is a good company and they know how to manage their debt. So it's important to not only just look at these few important metrics, but also look at the whole company and be able to tell a story with it. All right, so next up, we're going to be going over some solvency ratios, which I also have listed here. But I just have 2. I have debt to equity and times interest earned. So the ones we'll be going over are the interest coverage, debt to assets, and debt to equity. So we'll start off with debt to equity. And as you can see by this part right here, that debt to equity is total liabilities divided by total shareholders' equity. And this is essentially just measures how a company finances its operations and how much is through debt and how much is through other owned funds like through stockholders' equity. So companies mostly, or we as investors, use this for companies in capital intensive industries such as construction or manufacturing. because a lower debt to equity ratio suggests a more financially stable company with less reliance on debt. And these construction and manufacturing companies have to take on a lot of debt because of all of the inventory and because of all the machinery and because of all of the capital that they have to go through. So the next one is going to be debt to assets. And this is total liabilities again, but it's divided by total assets. And this measures the amount of companies' assets that are financed by debt rather than equity. So it's essentially debt to equity, the same thing, but just for assets. And this is important for company with physical assets, such as machinery manufacturers and construction companies, and all the same kind of companies. And then the last one we're going to go over is interest coverage ratio. And this is earnings before interest and taxes, which is EBIT, divided by the interest expense. And I don't have this on the website, but it is very important because it measures how easily a company can pay interest on its outstanding debt. So if a company has a lot of debt, they obviously have to pay interest on it. And this is a great way of showing if this company can continue to pay that interest or if it's going to become too much and financing all of this capital is going to become too much of a burden. So this ratio obviously is crucial for highly leveraged companies, such as large manufacturing companies where debt financing is very common because buying all this capital obviously takes a lot of money and you have to finance it. So it's important that these companies can continue to grow without taking on too much debt to where they can't pay it back over the long run. So now I'm back over on Schwab's website. I've used this website a few times in other videos, but this is my broker, and so I know how to use their website very well. And one thing I like about them over Yahoo Finance is they can compare your company to different companies. So I have Apple, we're still using Apple, and it's compared to other companies that Apple has deemed competitors, like Supermicro Computer and Western Digital. So if we go down, obviously you can find all of these metrics and ratios on Yahoo Finance or other websites, but I'm just kind of using different websites to show you what it looks like with different formatting. So here we're here with long-term debt to equity, which is essentially the same, but there's short-term debt and then there's long-term debt. Short-term debt is what we've kind of learned in accounting. There's like short-term notes payable, which is the loans companies have to pay off in the short term. Then there's long-term, which is like 5-10 years of financing. So if we look at Apple's debt to equity, it's 129. Now, if you remember what I said earlier, it's at a higher, a lower debt to equity ratio suggests a more financially stable company with less reliance on debt. So it is very important, again, to look at these metrics, not just one and evaluate a company, but a lot of metrics and use them all in unison. Because if you don't, you'd look at Apple's debt to equity and say, wow, this company has way too much debt. There's no way they can manage this. But it's Apple, and Apple knows how to manage their debt, like I said earlier. So it's very important to look at all these metrics in unison. All right, so now we're back for our last three that we're going to go over, which are efficiency ratios. So I do have these listed on the website. I have some other efficiency ratios, but essentially what they are is how efficient a company can turn inventory into cash. So we're going to be looking at things like inventory turnover, which I do have on this website, the inventory turnover ratio. Also things like asset turnover and receivables turnover. So how are these companies turning sales, or how efficiently companies can turn sales into profits? So the first one we're going to look at is inventory turnover, which I do have the inventory turnover ratio here. And this essentially is net sales divided by average inventory. And it tells you how many times a company has sold and replaced inventory during a given period. So ratios like this are important for businesses that are in the retail sector, consumer goods companies, companies where inventory management is very important, such as Target, Walmart, stuff like that, because higher turnover ratio suggests a more efficient inventory management. And then obviously a lower turnover could indicate either overstocking or bad sales on the store's part. So the next thing we're going to go over is asset turnover, which is net sales again, but instead of average inventory, it's going to be average assets. And this measures the value of a company's sales or revenues relative to the value of its assets. So this ratio obviously is relevant to companies with substantial asset bases, such as automotive manufacturers or airlines. And then the higher the asset turnover, this indicates efficiency in generating sales with their assets. So you obviously want a higher asset turnover because this means the company is using its assets to generate more sales and they're maximizing their returns on their investments. So when they make these new investments on their assets, these companies are doing a better job than their competitors at getting sales out of it. And then the last one we're going to go over is receivables turnover, which is net credit sales divided by average accounts receivable. Now, accounts receivable is when people pay on credit. You obviously don't have to pay now, you have to pay later. So companies keep track of accounts receivable, essentially how much money they're owed by people who have paid on credit or people who have promised to pay later. And the receivables turnover ratio is used to quantify a company's effectiveness in collecting its receivables or money owed by clients. So these companies obviously can't sell everything through cash, so they have to sell some on credit. And when you sell things through credit, that means you're trusting that the other person is going to pay the company back. And so it's important to keep track of these accounts receivable and have a high um, receivable turnover because that means that you're lending out to customers with strong creditworthiness or customers with high credit because they're more likely to pay back what they owe. Whereas if companies lend out to people who have lower credit or are less likely to pay back, then they're giving out inventory, but then the other people aren't likely to pay back, so they're not going to um, receive these accounts receivable. So it's important to have a high receivables turnover, especially for companies such as wholesalers. That's where uh, this ratio can really be used. So now we're on another website called Macro Trends. And I like to use this website because it gives you a lot of the metrics just straight up and it's easy to find and they're all labeled. So we're going to be looking at Target's inventory turnover ratio, and that is a better representation of this ratio than a company like Apple because Target has um, more inventory in their stores and their shelves, and I essentially like this more as a example. So we can see that Target's inventory ratio is 1.49. And for reference, Walmart's is 2.19. Now, if you remember what I said, a higher turnover ratio suggests efficient inventory management and stronger sales. So this means that Target's lower inventory turnover ratio could indicate either overstocking or their sales are beginning to decline. So that is it for this video, going over all of the metrics and a few of the websites to use them on. Thank you so much for watching.